Hello and welcome. You're watching World Panorama with me, Ishan. World Panorama is your weekly roundup of all the big international news that's made headlines this week. And in fact, let's start off with the headlines of around the world this week. Taliban's Mullah Omar is dead. The insurgent group admits the terror kingpin's dead this time and names a successor. Second round of the fledgling Taliban Afghanistan peace talks postponed as uncertainties loom. Turkey launches anti-terror offensive against Islamic State and Kurdish strongholds in North Syria and Iraq, with the US and NATO voicing solidarity. Turkish Prime Minister claims new fight could change the balance in the region. Ceremonies held in North and South Korea to mark 62 years of the armistice. The legacy of this war that's still not technically over persists, with the pain of families divided adding to it a very tragic dimension. And England trounced the Aussies in a one-sided third Ashes test at Edgbaston. England now 2-1 up in the 5-match series. Well, a top story and the big news this week, Taliban Chief Mullah Omar is dead. And this time it's official. Though it wasn't clear when he died a few weeks ago or 2 years ago. What we do know, however, is that the death potentially alters the state of the ongoing peace talks between the Taliban and the Afghan government, beside posing an existential crisis for the Afghan Taliban itself. Here's more.
One terrorist leader, Hafiz Saeed, leading prayers at the funeral of another, Taliban kingpin Mullah Omar, in Lahore, Pakistan. In so many ways, Omar's death marks the end of an era for Afghanistan, for the Taliban, and raises concerns on the future of an Afghan-Taliban peace process that had just about begun. An air of uncertainty persists on when Omar actually died. 2 years ago, as claimed by the Afghan government, or a few days back. 2 days after news of his death, the Taliban spokesperson said, quote, "For some time he had been suffering a kind of sickness. Over the last 2 weeks it became serious. Due to this, he passed away," unquote. And the first casualty is visible already. The second round of peace talks between the insurgents and Afghan government, due to take place this week, stand postponed indefinitely. Though talks initiator Pakistan insists it's definitely not over yet.
Pakistan government, Pakistani armed forces, Pakistani political parties, Pakistani public opinion, Pakistani opinion makers, all are on the same page, and every one of them is interested that some negotiations should take place and finally it should lead towards stability in Afghanistan. So on the part of the government of Pakistan, I don't think there is any chance of withdrawing from the process at this stage.
December 2001 was the last the world actually saw of the man, when Kandahar fell to US forces and he escaped with Al-Qaeda chief Osama bin Laden. But Mullah Omar's exploits as Taliban chief and a close confidant of bin Laden are legendary. Born in 1962, Omar joined the rebels in 1979 to fight troops of the former Soviet Union who'd occupied Afghanistan, and he rose to head it. He lost his right eye in 1989 in fighting Soviet troops. After the Soviets pulled out, civil war engulfed Afghanistan. In 1996, the Taliban seized control of nearly all of Afghanistan and imposed its version of Islamic law. The worst came in 2001, with the Taliban ordering destruction of the 1,500-year-old Bamiyan Buddhas. The Taliban have named a successor, a top military man, Mullah Akhtar Mohammad Mansoor, and a lot depends on how the new chief matches up. At stake, besides the future of peace talks with the government, is the crisis within the group amid large-scale defections to the Islamic State. The old aura has faded and internal divisions deepen.
ISIS itself becomes a warning for Taliban. And for example, in the east in Nangarhar, they were able to kick out Taliban from some of the districts. That is also a danger for peace process, because I don't think that all Taliban would agree with the peace process. Some of the field commanders, they might refuse, and then they could become member of Daesh.
It's 13 years into the war between the Taliban and the Afghanistan government, killing hundreds, stalling development, virtually freezing the nation in a state of perpetual terror and violence. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha Television.
And we're joined by strategic affairs expert Qamar Agha to help us understand how does the death of Mullah Omar, and I mean, in terms of this story, it's also the fact that the news is coming in after 2 years. I mean, we still do not know when he actually died. So in that sense, what do you make of this entire development, first of all?
You see, there are a number of things. First of all, it was kept secret because Pakistan, it looks, finding difficulty to nominate the next leader of the group. Pakistan wanted its own man. So there was a tussle within the group, So it took longer time to sort it out, that tussle. A group of people were running the organization in last two. A council was running it in his name, So that was the reason, for long. Now Pakistan has got the new chief, which is...
He's under Pakistani control, would you say?
Has to be. In Al-Qaeda as well as this Taliban, they prefer, the people, the person, Zawari is their man also. Similarly, this person. Mullah Omar himself was a strategic asset of the Pakistani army, All of them, it's funded by them.
All right, so then what about the peace talks then between the Afghans and the Taliban, and the fact that Pakistan is also such an important factor in all that? So how does this change that entire process?
You see, peace talks, is just on the front, because Pakistan wants to use Taliban card, want to get maximum concession with the government, in Afghanistan, which is not, earlier they were not prepared to negotiate with the Taliban. It was the Taliban, which forced them to come to the negotiation, and Americans also believe, this is the best option, But I don't think, it will help solve any problem, These are the groups, because there are two things. Taliban is not a monolithic group.
Okay.
It's divided into different groups and factions, and most of the time they are fighting among themselves also, The Tehreek-e-Taliban, Pakistan has a total different, has no connection. They don't even regard Mullah Omar or now Mansour as their chief, So these are the difficulties. One section of number of groups have been moving towards the more militant ISIS sites, These are the difficulties. So if you negotiate with one group, the other, start creating problems, or suicide bombings starts, simultaneously. We have seen, earlier, when the talks was going on in China, the bombing was taking place in Afghanistan or in Pakistan, and they said we don't accept these negotiations. So it's a very difficult thing.
All right, so the situation is then pretty volatile, then I must say, because it threatens to completely go out of control. Because who's in control in Afghanistan right now? The government and the army are, of course, there, but they're not that strong enough to completely put the Taliban keep the Taliban at bay in that sense.
You see, there is one thing, Taliban cannot come back into power. That is definitely, the Afghan army is determined. They're fighting, they're not trained enough to deal with these people, They need more training. They are being trained in the process. Second thing, the people of Afghanistan are not prepared to accept Taliban rule anymore, They are fed up, they are sick and tired. Afghanistan has changed in the last 10 or 15 years, Now schools are running, universities, people are coming out, business are going. And in between, the suicide bombing is also going on. The problem is, the bordering area. Their problem is not the militant. They say the major problem is from Pakistan, which is backing these groups. They are highly trained groups. They're trained by the ISI. They have equipment, weapons, everything, and Pakistan is using them. That's the problem. That's why they are trying to involve Pakistan also in the negotiations.
All right, so but a brief point you mentioned a little earlier, and I want to talk a little bit more about that, about the fact that the growing attractiveness of the Islamic State in this region. Now, given the fact that the Taliban is becoming this unstable under a new leadership, Mullah Omar, or that entire council not in charge anymore. So how does how does the IS play into this region where it wasn't that big a force? I mean, it's still concentrated more on the other fronts.
You see, ISS doesn't have people, because this is the region where the local people will work. This is the area where Taliban was specially designed to work here. Al-Qaeda and other Arab groups were operating basically. Their region was the Middle East, they were there in the Middle East. So this region, what is happening because of this factional fights within the militant groups, forcing a lot of people to go towards the ISS. So a number of groups, showing their allegiance, who are not happy with the Pakistan government or whosoever, having problem with Mullah Omar's faction of Taliban or other factions, they are showing their allegiance to ISS,
Talking about the IS, Agha, we'll ask you to stay on because there's this other story I'd want your comment on. And there's been fresh concern on the Islamic State extending its terror fangs to India. Now, a document found in Pakistan and understood to be written by IS militants has revealed that the terror groups have plans to entice the US into battle by targeting diplomats and launching attacks on India. The Urdu document accessed by USA Today reveals the terrorist group's plans for all-out war to bring about the end of the world. It speaks of the scale of the ambition of the Islamic State, including targeting India to provoke the US to intervene. It details how they are urging the units of Pakistani and Afghan Taliban into one army with ISIS and asking Al-Qaeda to join IS to forge a caliphate. And we have with us a strategic affairs expert, Qamar. Agha Sahab, a very quick comment on this because we have very little time. But as far as the IS threat extending into India, till now we've seen very few stray cases thanks to social media who've been influenced. But is there a larger threat?
Still, I don't see much of Indians going to that side. We have a democracy. A lot of Indians are happy, We don't have much problem. Whenever we have Muslims have problem with the government or sorted out through democratic means, there are avenues to come out. So in a democratic setup, I don't see much people joining. Nevertheless, threat is there because the Pakistan-backed groups, they like Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, and many others, smaller groups, going towards the ISIS. Or Kashmiri, some of the other Kashmiri groups, they have money, they can win over some disgruntled youth in Kashmir, they can win over those people. These are the people, you don't need thousands of people to create chaos and anarchy. You need few people, who can create chaos and anarchy in their project. Basically, they're working, the game plan is to create terror.
So as they say in the document, end of the world.
So the terror, they will create. For that, they don't need many people. The threat is real. I think the Indian intelligence agencies or Indian security apparatus, must be taking it very seriously. But on the other hand, Indian military establishment or security establishment, for that matter, is quite well prepared. They have been dealing with the militancy last 30 years,
Right.
And they are very well equipped and well trained and mostly succeeded. They have been successful in preventing since 2008 any major attack on India. So I'm sure, they will be able to manage this threat also. But the threat would be moving, to me it looks, more towards Central Asia because there the problem is real. They would try to move that side because there the oil is there, gas is there, money is there. Which ISS need all these things for further development, and they have their people in these areas.
All right, we'll have that discussion some other day, but Agha Sahab, thank you very much for coming in and helping us understand the situation in Afghanistan. Of course, its fallout elsewhere. Thank you so much for coming in and helping us do that. We'll take a very short break here right now, but still to come on the other side. The UN-called ceasefire in Yemen doesn't even last 24 hours as the humanitarian situation in the country is worsened. We'll have more on that after a short break. Welcome back. You're watching World Panorama. Now, Turkey has launched a full-fledged two-pronged anti-terror cross-border offensive against the Islamic State and Kurd militants after terror violence hit the nation last month. The NATO military alliance has voiced complete solidarity with Turkey, with the US stepping up airstrikes against the IS from Turkish territory. The Turkish Prime Minister has even said that the exercise would change the balance in the region.
It's become an almost regular exercise this last week. US planes taking off from Turkish air bases to pound Islamic State targets in Syria along the Turkish border, a response to the 21st of July suicide blast in Suruk. The crackdown comes as a complete turnaround to Turkey's earlier dilly-dallying, a seeming reluctance to join the anti-IS coalition. The stance is clear now, extending to a definite turnaround for the region, an IS-free zone, as per Turkish Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu. The presence of a Turkey that can use its force effectively can lead to consequences which can change the game in Syria, Iraq and the entire region. Everyone should see that. It's a twin-pronged crackdown. The blitz against the Islamic State on one hand extends to bombing of Kurdish militants in southeast Turkey and across the border in Iraq, believed to be the Turkey's primary target. Security along the entire Turkish border with Syria and Iraq is at a new high. Within Turkey, there has been a clampdown on elements even remotely related to the Islamic State and Kurdish groups, with foreign workers in Turkey coming under the scanner too.
50 gözaltı var. 50-60 civarında bir yabancı uyruklu var. Bu yabancı uyrukluların Türkiye kapalı bir toplum değil. Yani yurt dışında Türkiye hakkında IŞİD'e destek veriyor, yabancı savaşçılar konusunda gereken yapılmıyor diye iddia edenler tamamıyla Türkiye hakkında bir algı operasyonu yapıyorlar. Türkiye yılda 40 milyonu aşkın turiste ev sahipliği yapıyor.
NATO countries have proclaimed complete support to Turkey in talking on the Islamic State. A specially called meeting of NATO's North Atlantic Council said help against IS terror to any victim nation in the grouping was non-negotiable.
Terrorism in all its forms can never be tolerated or justified. It is right and timely that we hold this meeting today to address the instability on Turkey's doorstep and on NATO's border. NATO is following developments very closely, and we stand in strong solidarity with our ally Turkey.
Internally, Turkey's attack on the PKK party and Kurdish targets in Syria and Iraq has raised hackles, even signaling to an end to peace talks between the two. The government's critics, including opposition politicians, accuse President Tayyip Erdogan of trying to use the campaign against Islamic State as an excuse to crack down on Kurds. But it works the other way with the United States. Washington had earlier been unhappy with Turkey's yes and no stance on the Islamic State as a reluctant member of its coalition. Turkey's new stance makes it a key ally in the US war on terror.
We will be in continued contact with them in the days to come. And I think, frankly, where this really can lead towards is, again, a more even broader and more effective effort to degrade the ISIL safe haven across northern Syria and northern Iraq. Turkey can play an important role in those efforts. At the same time, of course, it will be working with a variety of partners on the ground to push ISIL out of those areas.
Turkey's joining the fight comes August ill for the Islamic State in particular. The potentially game-changing US-Turkey accord to create an IS-free zone in Syria signals big steps forward in the anti-terror malaise. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Let's take a look at now some news events that made headlines across the world this week in our Global Wrap.
The latest 5-day humanitarian ceasefire in Yemen collapsed even before it began, with violence escalating once again and little prospect of an imminent political solution. Saudi Arabia, which has been leading airstrikes on Yemen's Iran-backed Houthi rebels since March, declared the truce on Sunday, and it was supposed to last until Friday, but it was in tatters by Wednesday. The Saudi-led coalition bombed Houthi targets in northern Yemen near the Saudi border. Other strikes were reported in the southern Laj province. Fighting on the ground has also intensified. The International Monetary Fund has declined to join a new bailout program for Greece until conditions for debt sustainability, including debt relief and economic reforms, are clearly assured. An IMF official said the IMF can only support a financial rescue program that is comprehensive. The IMF staff stressed that Athens needed more progress on reforms and the country's European Union creditors needed clearer commitment on debt relief before the fund decides to join a proposed new €86 billion bailout program. A German of Somalian origin is under arrest for the suicide bombing at a landmark hotel in Mogadishu in Somalia this week. 13 people were killed as a bomb-laden vehicle rammed into the 6-story Jazeera Palace Hotel. The hotel houses diplomatic missions of China and the UAE and is a popular hotel of foreign government officials. The Chinese government reported one of its embassy staff members was killed and 3 others injured. The Somalia-based militant group Al-Shabaab took responsibility for the incident, calling it retaliation for the killing of dozens of innocent civilians allegedly killed during attacks in southern Somalia by the Ethiopian military forces.
Now, it's 62 years this week since the ceasefire between North and South Korea and the formation of the so-called demilitarized zone between the two. Both these nations have moved in starkly contrasting directions since. Political tension and military spats between the two continue, despite an inherent emotional link between their peoples and the deep tragedy of their separation. That division is perhaps the most lasting legacy of the Cold War.
July 27, 1953. An armistice, a truce signed between US-led UN forces with North Korea and China halting the Korean War. A halt to some of the brutal warfare mankind has known. Both countries held ceremonies and celebrations marking the 62nd anniversary of that truce. But even now, it is no concrete treaty. Technically, the two nations are still at war. These ceremonies, while they claim to celebrate individualities, somewhere also mark persistent, unrelenting tensions in Asia's Korean peninsula.
Today, the armistice reflects the enduring commitment to the international community to preserve peace and stability. Its maintenance continues to be a complex task, especially when noting the provocative actions of North Korea. The nation's pursuit of nuclear weapons, long-range ballistic missiles, and proliferation of weapons in violation of UN Security Council resolutions continue to threaten stability in this region and in the world.
This is the village where the truce was signed, Panmunjom, on the military demarcation line, where South and North Korean soldiers stand on guard, staring at each other from a distance. This is now the 200-kilometer-long, 4-kilometer-wide demilitarized zone and de facto border that divides the two Koreas, as per the Armistice Agreement. Despite its name, it is the most heavily militarized border in the world. Down the last 5 decades, the two nations have moved in extreme directions, in the growth of their economies, in the development of their peoples, in the opening up to the world. Whereas the South Korean economy that has US support has expanded by leaps and bounds, North Korea's has contracted bleakly. The North has isolated itself from democratic functioning, hit further by sanctions due to its nuclear ambitions. And the road ahead in relations looks bleak too. Reunions of families broken by the division have stopped since 2010. The human link withering with time.
I don't think they'll ever be united again, no. They are too far behind. The South Koreans are too energetic. They need a new government in the North Korean government. So the Korean government has so much progressed. So they look into the future, they plan for the future, and they work toward the future. So I am impressed with what South Korea has done over the last 60 years.
Western powers and the UN have held out invitations to North Korea for negotiations to ease sanctions, of the like with Iran on its nuclear program. But they have been snubbed, despite news emanating of dipping state of affairs within South Korea and the plight of people there.
The Iran deal demonstrates the value and the possibilities that negotiations bring. It demonstrates, again, our willingness when we have a willing counterpart, and it demonstrates our flexibility when the DPRK makes the decision that it wants to choose a different path. So,
North Korea-South Korea ties today remain muddied by mutual suspicion. The North continues to raise the rhetoric, slamming joint military exercises by South Korean allies as rehearsals for an invitation. 62 years since that truce was signed, the tensions are as high as ever, because technically the two nations are still at war. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
On now to the big sports news of the week, all the thrills and spills in our sports wrap.
England won the third Ashes test by 8 wickets with more than 2 days to spare at Edgbaston on Friday to take a 2-1 lead in the 5-match series. Australia had made a poor 136 in their first innings before England's 281. In their second innings, Australia managed 265, setting England a target of 121 on the third day, making it something of a walkover for England in the end. England had hammed the Aussies in the first test but were clobbered back in the second. England now lead the 5-match series 2-1. Beijing beat Kazakhstan's Almaty to back the rights to host the 2022 Winter Olympics. IOC delegates handed the 2022 Olympic and Paralympic events to Beijing, followed a secret ballot in Kuala Lumpur. This came after Chinese President Xi Jinping made a last-minute vow to host the event worthy of the honor. The Chinese capital will be the first city to host both a summer and winter games after having hosted the 2008 Olympics. Mexico clinched their 7th Gold Cup title on Sunday with a 3-1 victory over Jamaica. Despite a fast and inspired start by the Jamaicans, Mexico quickly turned the tide and got goals from Andres Guardado, Jesus Corona and Oribe Peralta in the victory. Guardado scored his second goal of the tournament and won the tournament's Golden Ball Awards as the top player. Germany's Sebastian Vettel won an emotional Hungarian Grand Prix for Ferrari. Vettel dedicated his win to Bianchi, the Marussia driver who died in hospital 9 months after suffering severe head injuries at the Japanese Grand Prix. The win was Vettel's 41st, putting him level with the late triple champion Ayrton Senna on the all-time list. It was his first win in Hungary.
That's all in World Panorama this week. We'll be back with another edition next week. Keep watching Rajya Sabha TV.